I mentioned last week that these last couple sermons I've got, which is this week and then the 29th, I'll be on vacation next week, I was reflecting on just some lessons learned, and it wasn't that I sat down and tried to be real profound or anything. It was just some couple of things that had been on my mind. And so last week it was trust, and what's the Bible's call on our lives to trust. And this one's a little bit different. We're calling this one the lesson of the harvest, and it's right in the middle. Then next week, or the 29th, will be the lesson of the watching world. Go on to the next slide. This is a picture of our property over here that we bought from Harold Chadwick. And we bought it in 2012. In 34 years I've been here, I think we've had 2 votes that were unanimous. The one we did for Bo Stanley a month ago, and the vote to purchase Shad's property. That was unanimous too. And Harold had lived next door to the church since he bought it around 1970. And he had the green thumb. Man, he could just make anything grow. And on that green space that's just over here between the gym building and his house, he had 5 different garden plots there in different sizes, and he had different things growing there. Well, this was one of them, and so we offered to the church, and Marty and I were two that grabbed hold of it, to put gardens there, if you want. And we decided that we did it for 2, maybe 3 years. I can't remember how long we did it, but we called it Good Eats Garden. There's our garden as it starts. And over the couple years that we did it, I think we planted at least 40 tomato plants. Didn't even get 1 tomato off those plants. Now, Larry Robb is here. He's in the back. And Larry, he has gardens and grows tomatoes. So while got our garden growing, and I'm getting nothing out of those tomatoes, Larry's coming into the church, or Barb, with bags of tomatoes. He got so many tomatoes, he could supply the ketchup industry with all the tomatoes they need. I can't even get 1 out of 40-some plants. But there's something about gardens and agriculture the Bible grabs onto to teach us a really important life principle. It's a principle that's universal, applies to everybody. Rich or poor, whether a person has been to college or not, a person has a skilled trade or not, a person has a mansion or is homeless. This principle applies to every single human being. And the Bible uses the idea of gardening, agriculture, to teach the principle, and it's the principle of the harvest. And that's what we're going to look at today from the Bible. So here's a section in Galatians we're going to read, and this is the section that has the principle. We'll kind of explain it, and then we're going to see it played out in a family in the Bible. So Galatians chapter 6, and I'm starting in verse 7 at the top there. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man or a person reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. This is God's word. Now, give the backstory here of this principle of what you sow is what you reap, what you plant is what you harvest. We're going to give the backstory here, why he puts it in this letter, and then we'll go and see a real-life illustration of it in the Bible. Paul's writing to a region of churches. So some of his letters are to a church. This is to a region, and the letter is to be circulated to a number of churches. The churches got off to great starts. God was blessing. Things are great. Until an infection creeped into these churches. And the infection is what we're going to call legalism, which is the churches began to believe, yes, you need Jesus, you've got to have Jesus, but then they would add A, B, and C to Jesus that you had to do if you wanted to be 100% certain God was smiling on you. And it's that A, B, C part that made Paul really mad. Because what legalism does, and that's what was happening to these churches, it took the joy and the fellowship and the sweetness and displaced those, and in their place, there was conflict, suspicion, judgmentalism, measuring people, pride, and that sweet fellowship was just destroyed. It was gone. And so Paul attacks that in this letter, and at the end, he adds this little piece where he says, don't be, God's not mocked. What you plant in the ground, you're going to harvest. What you sow, you're going to reap. And he's saying to the churches, what you're experiencing, this conflict, this suspicion, this judgmentalism, is simply the harvest of what you have allowed to be planted in your soil, which was legalism. So that's kind of the backstory to it. So we're going to go all the way to the front of the Bible, to the book of Genesis in chapter 25, and we're going to see this played out in a family. And the family is headed by a man named Isaac, and then we're going to watch what happens in his son, whose name is Jacob. The first principle of the harvest is this, that whatever you sow, you're going to reap. In other words, you can't put a potato in the ground and expect you're going to get watermelon. You can't plant beans and think you're going to get tomatoes. Whatever seed goes in the ground, that's what you're going to get. Whatever you sow is what you're going to reap. And so that's the first principle. So we're going to see it here in Genesis chapter 25. So if you have a Bible, I'm going to start reading in verse 19. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Did you know, this is a little interesting side note here, in the book of Genesis, the single story that's given more space in the Bible, more ink, is not creation of the universe in 7 days, not the fall of Adam and Eve into sin. As important as those two events are, they get less ink in the book of Genesis than the story of finding a wife for Isaac, and the wife was named Rebekah. It's the single longest chapter in the book of Genesis. Verse 21, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled within her. Now, the word jostled there, kind of an interesting sounding word, but it doesn't capture, in my view, what the Hebrew word is trying to say, because the Hebrew word means to fight, to oppress, to break. It can be used of you're working with wood and you drive a splinter into your thumb. See? Jostle doesn't quite capture that. Oppress does, fight does, break does, splinter does. But it's describing the trouble she had in her pregnancy with these twins that she was going to give birth to. She said, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger. He's saying to her, what's happening inside you with your pregnancy is a taste of what the future is going to be like for those 2 boys and the people who come from them. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. And Esau is similar to the Hebrew word for hairy. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up. Isaac became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Every parent, when they're going to have kids, when they have 2, 3, 4, however many they have. He wants to treat them equally. I don't think Isaac and Rebekah sat down and talked about, and I think it just happened. Isaac was drawn to his son that was like him. Rebekah is drawn to the son that was like her, evidently. But the text is clear. Isaac favored Esau. Rebekah favored Jacob. And the family's wedged now. Okay, now, hold your place there and go to Genesis chapter 37. So into this family, the seed of favoritism gets planted. Genesis 37, verse 2. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. He brought to their father a bad report about them. Now, at this point in time, Jacob's family has 13 children, 12 boys, 1 girl. Joseph was the second youngest, but the firstborn son of Jacob and the wife he loved, whose name was Rachel. He had 2 wives. He was tricked into marrying Leah. He didn't want Leah. Instead of settling for that, he said, I'm going to marry the girl I want. And so he, of his own volition, chooses to have 2 wives. And you can imagine that's just not going to work. It's not going to work. Because Leah starts having children. Rachel is prevented from having children, having one for several years. And you can imagine the hostility in that home when Leah's having kids right and left and Rachel can't have any. Now we're several years later, and Joseph is a son born to Jacob and the wife he loved, Rachel. Verse 3. Now Israel, that was another name for Jacob, loved Joseph more than his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. The word ornate is a Hebrew word. They're not sure what it means. It's special. Something about that robe is special. It's like you have 5 kids, and the youngest one turns 16. The youngest one gets a brand new Camaro. The other 4 got a handshake and a birthday cake, and that was it. Well, the other 4 are going to see that Camaro, and it's going to be bad. That's what the robe represented. When his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. The first principle, we reap what we sow. And Isaac sowed into his family the seed of favoritism, and it shows up in Jacob's life. And the Bible doesn't say, I don't think it's a stretch. I don't think it's my guess, though, that Jacob grew up telling himself, I will never do to my kids what my dad did to me. And here he's doing it. And that seed of favoritism that was sown into that family by Isaac has been harvested in Jacob's family in favoritism too. That's the first principle. We reap what we sow. Let's go on to the next slide. This one is, we reap more than we sow. You put 1 kernel of corn in the ground, you get a corn stalk with ears of corn, each ear having dozens and dozens and dozens of corn kernels on it. We reap more than we sow. So, all right, now we have to go back to Genesis 27, back to Isaac. And then we'll go back and see how this showed up in Jacob's life. As we read through here, I want you to notice the narrator makes a point of highlighting all of Isaac's senses, the 5 senses, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling. They're all showing up in this narrative. That's not an accident. 27 verse 1. When Isaac was old and his eyes were weak, there's sentence number 1. Right up front, he's telling us he can't see. He called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son, here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I'm now an old man. I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so I may give you my blessing before I die." The blessing was the handing off of a father to the oldest son the keys to the family, essentially. It marked that older son as the now leader of the family. But we had just read that God's plan was for that leadership to be passed not to the older son Esau, but to the younger son Jacob. Here Isaac is veering off from that. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and to bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me tasty food,' and so forth." Verse 8, "Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats." I'm going to flag that. We're going to come back to that. Little thing called goats. Coming back to that. "So I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so he may give you the blessing before he dies." Now, Jacob's not dumb. He understands this is fraught with problems. Verse 13, Jacob said to his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man. I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him, would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." His mother said to my son, "Let the curse fall on me. Just go and do what I say. Go and get them for me." Look, just don't argue with me. You ever said it to your kids? Don't argue with me. Just do it. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. So she covered his hands with the smooth part and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. Then she handed them to her son Jacob and the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and he said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said, "I'm Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of the game so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "Well, how'd you find it so quickly?" You know, it's one thing to tell a lie. I mean, everybody does that from time to time, or has. It's another thing to tell a lie and put God in your lie. That's what you don't want to do. You don't want to do that. Isaac said, "How did you find it so quickly?" Esau replied, "The Lord your God gave me success." Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you." There's sense number 2. He senses something's not right. "Come here so I can touch you and know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac, touched him, and said, here's sense number 3. "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. You got to be a hairy guy if a goat skin can replicate it. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. There's sense number 4, taste. He brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him, and when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, there's the 5th sense. He blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers." There it is. Be Lord over your brothers. He's handing off to the younger son the keys of the family. "May the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who you curse be cursed, and those you bless be blessed." After Isaac finished blessing him and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. The Hebrew has it, it's almost like as soon as he went out the back door, Esau comes in the front door. It's that close. So we reap more than we sow. So Isaac has planted into his family the seed of favoritism. that now it's growing, and we can see that it's put a split between he and Rebekah. They're at odds. I mean, they're hugely at odds with each other. And look what happens here at the end of the story. Esau comes in and learns what's happened. And he says, I lost my place here. Oh, there, okay, in verse 41. He learns what's happened. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, the days mourning my father are near, then I'll kill my brother Jacob. So the seed of favoritism planted in Isaac's life and family has harvested more than he planted. Not only has a rift in his marriage, but his one son is threatening to kill the other one when his dad dies. Okay, jump over to chapter 37 back in Genesis. That's pretty funny. That's like that's the story. Okay, chapter 37. That was pretty funny. Okay, verse 5, chapter 37. Joseph had a dream. He told it to his brothers, and they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to them. His brother said, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? They hated him all the more because of the dream he had said. Jump down to verse 11. It says, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So now in the family, the brothers now have this hatred that's affecting the entire family. Verse 12. Now his brothers had gone out to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. Jacob said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. He said, go and see if all is well with your brothers and the flocks, and bring back a report to me. Then he set him off. So Joseph arrives, verse 19. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, and then say a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed his blood. Throw him into a cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from their father and to take him back, or rescue him for his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. They took his car, so to speak. They took the one thing that was a symbol of their dad's favoritism, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty and there was no water in it. They sat down to eat their meal. How do you do that? How do you throw your brother into a cistern knowing he's going to die and then just go eat a hamburger? They looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our own brother, our flesh and blood. And they agreed, so they sell him to these slave traders. Verse 31. After he had been sold, they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. What was the animal that Rebekah cooked to trick Isaac? It was a goat. You know, all these years later, they're going to use a goat to trick Jacob. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it to see whether it's your son's robe. He recognized it and he said, it's my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. You know what's interesting in the text? The word translated in verse 33, he says, a wild animal has devoured him. The word devoured in verse 25 is translated as to eat. And what the narrator is saying is that, yeah, Joseph was devoured, but it wasn't a wild animal. Who did the devouring? It was his brothers. They're the ones that devoured him. So the seed gets planted into Isaac's family by Isaac through his favoritism, and it harvests into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined, because now in Jacob's family, it's harvested into, he's got 13 children at odds with themselves, and the brothers conspire to, in effect, kill him, or at least sell him into slave traders, and bring back word to his father that Joseph has in fact died, catapulting Jacob into grief now that's going to last 22 years. So that little seed of favoritism in Isaac's family has grown into a tremendously terrible harvest that was much larger than anyone could have imagined. And Genesis 37 tells us that we reap later than we sow. Isaac was showing favoritism when the boys were growing up. Esau was the one that was more like Isaac and things that Isaac liked. And now here it is, the harvest is decades later into Jacob's family and Jacob's sons when they're adult men is when the harvest is taking place. I want to show you the next slide and give you some things of seeds that we can plant in our kids, or seeds that are dropping into our children's lives all the time. Do I have to study seed? Don't judge me, seed. Give me money even though I didn't earn it, seed. The seed now is better than later. The seed, if you don't affirm me, then you must hate me. If I want it, then it must be good seed. And these are just samples, but seeds are floating around into our kids all the time. And Isaac dropped into his family the seed of favoritism that just, it blew up in a way that he could never have imagined. Well, let's go back to Galatians chapter 6, because I want you to see that all is not lost. So go back to where we started, to Galatians 6 in the New Testament. And the last principle of the harvest is, don't let past harvest control what you plant now. Whatever harvest you may see in your family, in your children, in your own life, don't let that dictate what you plant now. For Galatians chapter 6, Paul talks about reaping destruction and reaping life. And he said, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we don't give up. His point is, all is not lost. Those churches could recover the joy of ministry and sweet fellowship. And the things that we may see in our lives, the harvest that we can't ignore how things turn out. Paul is saying, but you can be planting seeds now. Seeds of a good harvest. Planting seeds of kindness and gentleness. Planting seeds of telling other people about Jesus. Planting seeds of patience. Those seeds will yield a harvest too. No matter what the past harvest was like, new seeds can be planted and a new harvest can come. And if we don't, he says here, if we don't become weary at this, and that's the thing about gardening, man. I showed you that slide of that garden we put over there, shads. And you got to be on that all the time. If you plant a garden and you just turn around, walk away, weeds will take over within 2 weeks, and it's over. It's game over. You can't recover at that point. That's why he says, don't grow weary. Keep at it. Keep your eye on the harvest. You see a weed, come and pluck that out. Because if you stay at it, you'll reap a harvest, he says here. A good harvest if we don't give up. If we don't get tired and walk away. So whatever we see in our life now, a harvest from past seeds or planted, the Bible is saying you can't fix that. You can't go back in time. But what you can do is plant good seed now that will yield a harvest for you of good that you'll be a blessing in the future. That's still possible. No matter where you are, you could be my age in your 60s, you could be 15, you could be 85. You can still plant good seeds and see a harvest if you don't give up, if you don't grow weary in it. So let's take a moment as we close. Ask yourself, God, what harvest do I see in my life, in my family's life? What do I see in my children? Did I plant seeds like Isaac did? Now, ours might not have been favoritism. Did I plant materialism into them? Did I sow seeds of greed? Did I sow seeds of anger? Did I sow seeds that when you throw things at the TV when the news isn't what you like, when things aren't what you want them to be? And if you see those seeds, come to the Lord and say, God, I repent of those because I was planting bad stuff in the ground of my life. But God then says, so plant good seed now, and you'll see good things come in the future if you don't grow weary and give up. So pray over that for a moment, and when we close our service, our altar's open. If you want to pray over the harvest or the seed that you see in your life, come and God will pour grace over you. We'll pray, and then the band will come.